Hello, bonjour. I come to you today on another grim day with another grim milestone in our fight against the COVID pandemic. We read today that we have 2 times as many cases now as we did at the beginning of November. Today is particularly a difficult one for me and my family. It's my mother-in-law's 75th birthday today. She's celebrating it without any of her family. It's also her 55th wedding anniversary, and she's celebrating it away from all of her family and loved ones because of this devastating pandemic that continues to ravage our country. And as I mentioned that, I mention it so that we understand that we are still in the midst of a pandemic, that the price that people are paying day in and day out is real. It has not gone away. It is not better yet. And we need to do all that we can to make sure that we as politicians, as elected officials, as parliamentarians, are doing all that we can to get people through the very hopefully last stages of this incredibly difficult period for our country. That has got to be our sacred pledge to them, that we will not let factors other than what is in their best interests guide our decision making, that we will not let go of the cross-party cooperation and collaboration that managed to protect us from the worst ravages of this pandemic in its early days. I mention that in particular now because we are now deciding what to do about vaccine distribution. And vaccine distribution is a glimmer of hope. Everyone is describing it as the light at the end of the tunnel, but it only becomes that if we, in fact, make sure that we do the right thing and that we put aside anything other than considerations about who should get the vaccine and how quickly we can get it out. And so in that respect, I hope that my colleagues will agree across party lines that our vaccine distribution strategy needs to be guided by science, it needs to be guided by the experts, and it needs to be a national strategy. There are very tough choices that we are going to have to make about who gets the vaccine and when, and how quickly we can roll it out. Those decisions are best made, collectively and cooperatively and in a nonpartisan, non-political way. So let's not play the blame game. Let's not descend back into hyper-partisanship. Let's recognize that we are here. We are here now, and there will be time to reflect on the lessons learned, but we still have the most urgent parts of this pandemic left to deal with. We still have vaccine distribution left to deal with. In terms of today and today's fiscal update, I'm excited. I'm excited because every time we have a statement of this caliber, of this level, it is an opportunity for us to share a vision of hope and of the future that should excite people in Canada and that should give them more certainty about where we go next after this devastating period that we have been through. And so, of course, it is my hope that the government will seize this yet other historic moment that they've been presented with to share that idea, that story, that narrative of hope and vision that can help to lead us through this next period in the life of our country. And so for the Green Party of Canada, that vision of hope, that vision of the future is one in which we do two things that will allow us to be more resilient in the future and bring more certainty to the future. First is to complete our social safety net, and the second is to accelerate our transition towards a net zero green economy. And we can do this, and the Greens have had a plan. We have a plan. We have had a plan for some time. The key elements of that plan include a guaranteed livable income, placing long-term care under the Canada Health Act and taking profit out of our long-term care system, a guarantee that the bailouts that seem certainly headed down the pipeline particularly in carbon-intensive sectors, are responsible and conditional. And by responsible, I mean that they need to be focused on the workers in those sectors. They need to ensure that they are as protected as they possibly can be. And conditional, because this is the government's opportunity to attach conditions around greenhouse gas emissions reductions to those industries with set targets and with an implementation plan and with reporting and accountability mechanisms. We also want to see universal programs that we've talked about for many years, including childcare and pharmacare. And we're also seeking investments in the sectors of the future, in the sectors, the infrastructure and projects that are going to accelerate our progress to a net zero economy by contributing to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and where the future lies and where the economies of the future lie. So that is the Green Plan, and certainly we hope to see many of these elements in Minister Freeland's announcement today, because this should be everyone's plan. These are not partisan issues. We want people to be better protected should we ever arrive in this situation again. We want to join the growing global consensus that calls for green recoveries, and all of the countries who have managed to have a robust response to the pandemic while at the same time planning for the future. If we expect that we will have an effective treatment to the pandemic within the coming months and that it will be widely distributed during the course of next year, then certainly this is the time to be planning fully for our post-pandemic recovery period. It simply cannot wait. And so I tell the government today that Greens know, and hopefully they know, that the fastest way back for our economy is through a green recovery. And that our best chance for certainty is by filling out our social safety net and creating this green economy. And I say, yes, we do have an opportunity. The opportunity here is to do honor to all of the sacrifice and all of the loss that we have all had to live through during this period by making sure we are never back here again. We can only do that if we take the decisions now, if we have the courage and ambition that I know people in Canada do to seek something better and to build it together. Alors, aujourd'hui, nous sommes hâte de voir le gouvernement partager une stratégie pour un meilleur avenir pour notre pays. C'est le moment de parler d'espoir, c'est le moment de partager une vision pour notre pays. Et c'est le moment de continuer notre coopération, parce que nous sommes en train de considérer comment nous allons distribuer le vaccin dans notre pays. Et le Parti vert est clair que notre stratégie devrait être dirigée par les scientifiques, par la science, par nos officiels de santé, et ça doit être une stratégie nationale. Parce qu'il y aura beaucoup de difficultés, choix à faire, et ces choix doivent être faits sans des considérations partisanes, dans une manière collaborative et dans l'intérêt des peuples au Canada. Parce que nous avons tous perdu beaucoup. Et je pense aujourd'hui à ma belle-mère qui fête son 75e anniversaire seule avec son mari, sans son famille, parce que nous sommes encore dans cette pandémie. Alors aujourd'hui, nous cherchons plusieurs éléments dans le plan du gouvernement, et c'est des éléments non très traditionnels du Parti vert, parce que c'est les éléments dont nous avons encore besoin. Nous cherchons un revenu minimum garanti. Nous cherchons une stratégie pour nos centres de soins de longue durée qui le place sous la loi, sur la loi du Canada sur la santé. Nous cherchons une garantie que les renflouements des secteurs à forte intensité carbone soient responsables et conditionnels, qu'il y ait des conditions avec des vraies cibles et un plan d'implémentation et des manières de garder les comptes aussi. Et responsable, ça veut dire que ça soit ciblé exclusivement sur les besoins des travailleurs et travailleuses. Nous cherchons aussi des nouveaux programmes universels, dont garde d'enfants et l'assurance médicaments. Et aussi, nous cherchons des investissements dans les secteurs, dans l'infrastructure et dans les projets qui allons accélérer notre transition vers une économie verte. Parce que c'est là où nous allons trouver la certainté. C'est là où nous allons trouver les emplois du futur. C'est là où nous allons créer l'économie du futur. Alors, j'espère que notre gouvernement va saisir cette opportunité de joindre le consensus qui est toujours en train de croître, qui cherche un relancement qui est verte, un relancement de notre économie qui est verte, parce que c'est là où nous allons récupérer et réparer le dommage qui a été créé de la pandémie de manière le plus vite possible. Et avec ça, je prends les questions. Merci.
Nous allons maintenant prendre les questions, commençant avec les questions au téléphone. Un rappel, comme toujours, une question suivie par journaliste. We'll now take questions, starting with questions on the phone. As a reminder, one question, one follow-up per reporter. Operator, do we have a first question?
Thank you. Merci. Once again, please press star 1 at this time if you have a question. De nouveau, n'hésitez pas à appuyer sur étoile 1 pour toute question. There are no questions registered at this time.
We will take questions in the room. David?
Madam Paul, good morning. David Thornton, CBC News.
Good morning, David.
So around this time, we love to talk about deficits and fiscal anchors and stuff like that. So what's your views on that? Is that something that you care about and that you really want to see a plan to balance budgets?
Right now, we're still in the grips of this pandemic, and we hopefully will not be for much longer, but this is the time to be, and it's not spending to my mind, it's investing. This is the time to be investing in ensuring that we minimize the most risky parts of the pandemic. And, you know, the best investment we can make right now is in people. In terms of a fiscal anchor, I agree that it's very difficult to do it until we have the pandemic under control. It should not be the focus right now. That being said, we need to make sure that if we are spending tremendous sums of money, that we are spending that money in the most responsible way. And that is by doing the things that I said. If we invest in our social programs, if we invest in completing our social safety net, if we invest in accelerating our transition to a green economy and all of the short-term and long-term jobs and economic prospects that those things bring, then we put ourselves on a path so that when the day comes that we do need to pay the money back, we have set up our economy in a way that we can generate the revenue to do exactly that. So right now, we still need to be focusing on the immediate needs of people in Canada. We need to make sure that the government is covering those needs. This is not the time to be pulling back on those programs. But as I said, we need to be planning now for the future and how we are going to recover from the economic damage that the pandemic has caused.
So just to come back on that, so how important is it for you to see a plan to come back to balance, or to not see the deficit go over $400 billion? How important is that for you?
Today is not the day for a fiscal anchor. I think that having a fiscal anchor at this moment is a fiscal fantasy, which is why you have not seen that in other major economies. This is the time to be spending the money in the most responsible way, and that is by making sure that people in Canada are protected from the worst during what I hope is the dying months of the pandemic. We don't want to end up in a penny-wise, pound-foolish situation, which is what happens when you underinvest in protecting people during crises like these. This is the time to make sure that people's essential needs are covered, and it's the time for us to start planning for the economy that is going to support the social programs that we have now and the ones that we plan to put in place. But this is not the moment to be focusing on a fiscal anchor when there are too many unknowns. We have a vaccine hopefully on the horizon, but there are still far too many unknowns about the timing of the rest of the course of this pandemic for us to really be talking about that right now.
Yes, Ms. Paul, Lever Thume from the Canadian Press. What is one concrete example of a green condition you would like to see included in any bailout for airlines?
Well, the airline industry is a very carbon-intensive industry. I'll give you two conditions. As I said, one is with respect to the workers and making sure that any bailouts are focused on the workers and protecting them, because we've seen far too often bailouts heading into executives' pockets and into executive remuneration as opposed to the workers themselves. In terms of the kind of conditions that we want to see, each industry, each sector should be participating in our carbon budget. One of the things that has been missing, and that was missing in our climate accountability legislation, was any talk of a carbon budget, which is how much carbon do we as a country still get to use and still respect our commitments to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees. Each sector needs to participate in setting out what their carbon budget is, what their targets are, and then meeting those targets. And those targets need to be attached to a plan. The plan needs to have enforcement mechanisms. It needs to have accountability mechanisms. So those are all the elements that we would see. Just as for the federal government, we're talking about reporting, we're talking about targets, we're talking about setting a maximum tonnage. Those are all the things that could and should apply to carbon-intensive sectors as well. And this is the best opportunity for the Government of Canada to do it, particularly because we are investing public funds in bailing out these industries. It is something that needs to be done, but it needs to be done responsibly.
The other opposition parties have expressed some concerns about delays in vaccines, including logistics and procurement. Do you share those concerns? And if so, what can and should the federal government be doing right now to speed that up?
So first and foremost, this is not the time to play the blame game, and I'm going to really credit my son with that, because I'm a mother. As I mentioned today, I should be back in Toronto celebrating my mother-in-law's 75th anniversary with her, 75th birthday and 55th anniversary with her. But I can't because of this pandemic. And so when you turn on question period and you see the finger pointing and the vitriol, none of which is going to get us to a plan for vaccine distribution, none of which is going to do anything to help people in Canada at this moment, you realize that this is just not the time to play the blame game. Let's talk about lessons learned when we get to that moment, but let's talk about the urgent needs now. And so very specifically, as I said previously, the plan needs to be, we do have protocols in place for vaccine distribution, and so I hope that we will respect those protocols. Our plan needs to be guided by the science. It needs to be a national plan. And, it's a plan, as I said, where there are going to be some very difficult choices to be made. Who gets the vaccine first? How are we going to get the vaccine to remote communities? How are we going to make sure that Indigenous communities are protected? Many of the communities that are most infected by COVID have been low-income and racialized communities. Are we going to make sure that those communities have access to the vaccine first? These are very difficult choices that have to be made. We do not have much time to make them. The only way that we get it done as quickly and efficiently as possible is if we all work together across party lines, intergovernmentally, to make sure that we have those standards and that plan in place as soon as possible.
And I will check one last time if we have any more questions on the phone, operator.
Thank you. Merci. Once again, please press star 1 at this time. De nouveau, n'hésitez pas à appuyer sur étoile 1. There are no questions registered at this time.
Thank you. This concludes the press conference. Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse.
Merci beaucoup.